The wind shrieked through the plains like a wounded animal. Tall, brittle grasses bent and snapped beneath its fury. Dust rose in plumes, carrying with it the scent of ash, scorched wood, and something darker: memory. The world was a palette of gray and brown, broken only by the glint of a rusted horseshoe nailed to a crooked fence post. All that remained of the Clementine homestead were skeletal beams clawing at the sky, and a chimney blackened by flame. Sarah Clementine stood alone in the ruins, no taller than the rifle strapped to her back, with her baby sister bundled against her shoulder. The cloth around the infant was patched, too thin for the wind's bite, but Sarah held her tight, shielding her with arms that had grown wiry and firm far too soon. Her eyes, once wide with childhood curiosity, had narrowed to something harder, something unflinching. She looked not at what was lost, but at what remained. Her boots crunched over broken glass and singed paper. A page from her mother's hymnal fluttered weakly beside a half-buried toy horse. Behind her, the baby stirred. A soft sound escaped her lips, a half-formed whimper, and Sarah pressed a hand to her back, shushing her gently. "Quiet now, Lucy," she whispered, her voice rough from days of silence. "Ain't no one left to listen but ghosts." The wind answered. It howled through the wreckage, pulling Sarah's braid loose and sending splinters skittering across the ground. She squinted toward the horizon. No riders. Not yet. 3 weeks ago, this had been home. The day her mother died, the world had folded in on itself. The labor had come early, too early. Mary Clementine had cried out for boiling water, for clean cloth, for her husband, who hadn't yet returned from town. It was Sarah who ran for the kettle, who lit the fire, who sat beside her mother's sweat-slicked body and held her hand while Lucy came screeds, aiming into the world. By the time their father burst through the door, hat in one hand and a bottle of laudanum in the other, Mary was already cold. Sarah hadn't cried then. There hadn't been time. Her baby sister was purple, slippery, alive. That was all that mattered. Their father had changed after that. Once, he had been a quiet man, solemn and worn by war but not yet broken by it. He'd survived the smoke-choked trenches of Virginia, had seen men die in ditches for lines on a map, but it was the loss of his wife that carved the light from his eyes. In the days that followed, he moved like a ghost, sitting by the fire with his musket propped across his knees, whispering names Sarah didn't recognize. He stopped tending the horses, let the crops die in the field, spent whole nights outside, watching the ridge, the bottle never far from his reach. Then came the men. They arrived with laughter in their throats and dried blood on their boots. 4 of them, on horseback, faces tanned and eyes glinting with the same weary madness that had begun to fill her father's. Jonah Crow led them, a man whose smile never reached his eyes. He said he'd fought beside Pa in the 41st, said they were blood brothers, survivors of a world that didn't want them. Pa welcomed them with a hollow grin, clapped shoulders, and dragged chairs in from the barn. That night, the cabin glowed with lamplight and whiskey heat. Sarah watched from the staircase, Lucy nestled in her arms, as the men drank and told stories that curdled her stomach. They spoke of what they'd done to deserters, to freedmen, to towns that refused them. One man, skin like cracked leather, laughed about cutting a preacher's tongue out for lying. Another polished a silver coin with a child's name scratched into it. Pa didn't laugh, but he didn't stop them either. He stared at the flames and nodded. They stayed the night. Then 2, then a week. Sarah stopped sleeping. She kept Lucy close and learned which floorboards creaked when she crept through the dark. She listened through cracks in the wall, piecing together half-sentences, hushed arguments, and promises whispered like curses. Something was coming. A plan. A place they meant to burn. Her father seemed caught between them, tethered by loyalty, broken by loss. It was on the 8th night that she heard them talk about her. "She's a strong one," said Crow, voice low. "Could fetch a fine price down in Austin. Pretty too, like her ma." Sarah's stomach twisted. She didn't wait for dawn. She packed what little she could carry. Lucy, 2 blankets, the old revolver from beneath the hearth, and the coin purse her mother had kept hidden beneath a floor tile. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to go. But fate had teeth. She crept to the door just as thunder rumbled through the hills. The horses in the barn kicked and neighed. A gunshot rang out, sudden and sharp. She froze, Lucy squirming against her chest. A scream followed. She ran to the window and saw fire licking the barn's edges, black smoke billowing upward. Her father stumbled out. clutching his side, blood soaking through his shirt. One of the men shouted something, a command, guttural and brutal. Her father dropped to his knees. The muzzle flash lit the night. Sarah didn't cry. She backed into the shadows, found the loose board beneath the staircase, and crawled beneath it, curling herself and Lucy into the cold dirt. The men set the house alight. Heat swallowed everything. The baby wailed. Sarah covered her mouth, rocked her with trembling arms until the sounds outside faded into silence and the world collapsed into darkness. When she emerged, there was no sky, only smoke and stars. The fire had eaten their home, but not her. Somehow, by sheer will or the grace of a mother long gone, she had survived. The ground was littered with charred beams and the twisted remains of pots, pans, and memory. Her father's musket lay beside the well, barrel bent, useless, no sign of the men. She didn't wait for their return. She took to the wilds, stumbling across frost-hardened ground, her boots leaking and coat too thin. The revolver was heavy at her side. Lucy coughed often, her cries hoarse and weak. Sarah chewed tree bark when hunger became unbearable. She melted snow for water. She slept with one eye open, always listening. Wolves followed them once, their eyes glowing like coals. She lit a fire and screamed until her throat was raw. When that didn't work, she fired into the trees. The sound echoed like cannon fire, but it worked. The shadows slipped away. Days bled into nights, then weeks. Sarah found an abandoned trapper's hut by a frozen creek, half rotted but dry. She patched the roof with moss, cleaned the inside with rags, and boiled stale beans left in a jar. They lived. It was enough. She started to carve a life from the silence. By spring, Lucy could walk, toddling between the rocks with unsteady feet and a wild, wordless laughter that echoed through the trees. Sarah planted bitterroot and caught fish with her bare hands. She sewed crude diapers from old curtains and fashioned a sling to carry Lucy on her back. In time, she began to speak to the baby as if the girl could answer. "See that, Lucy?" she'd say, pointing at a hawk circling overhead. "That's freedom. Nothing hunts it, nothing owns it." She kept the revolver close, buried food in caches near the trees, taught herself to track, to set snares, to use every part of a rabbit. The land didn't offer comfort, but it offered rules, and Sarah learned them well. Sometimes at night, she'd sit by the fire and hum lullabies she only half remembered. She didn't sing them for herself. She didn't need the comfort. But Lucy needed to believe the world was kind. Sarah couldn't promise safety, but she could offer presence. Still, something lingered in the edges of her vision. A shape on a hilltop, a mark in the mud that wasn't hers. A branch broken too cleanly to be from wind. The past wasn't finished with them. Sarah knew that peace in the wild was a lie told by the trees. Real safety didn't exist. Not for girls like her. Not for children born under smoke and gunfire. But still, she hoped. The final days of spring brought warmer nights and longer silences. She built a fence from fallen logs and cleared a garden patch. Lucy learned to say her name, soft and garbled. Sarah. It made her chest ache in a way that had nothing to do with grief. She smiled more, sang sometimes. She even dared to believe they might be left alone. That was before she found the tracks. Bootprints in the mud behind the cabin, too wide to be hers, too fresh. Her pulse quickened. She checked the traps. Some were sprung, contents taken. A scrap of cloth snagged on a thorn bush fluttered in the wind. Not hers, not Lucy's. That night she loaded the revolver and sat by the door, wide-eyed and still. Whatever peace they'd built, it was borrowed time. But for now, as Lucy slept curled against her, Sarah watched the stars through the smoke hole and whispered to the silence, daring it to answer. She was no longer the girl hiding beneath floorboards, and if they came again, she would not run. The creek ran cold and clear, its surface catching glints of the morning sun as Sarah filled the bucket. Spring had pushed back the grip of winter, but the chill still clung to the shadows. Her hands, red and cracked from work, trembled only slightly now. She had grown used to the cold, to the weight of survival, to the silence of the woods. It had become a language she understood, full of warnings and lullabies alike. Behind her, Lucy's voice rang out, high-pitched and giddy, shouting at a bird that had landed near the stump where she played. The toddler held a stick like a scepter, shouting words that weren't quite real but had meaning nonetheless. Sarah smiled despite herself. There were rare moments like this, fleeting, precious, quiet things, where the world felt gentle again. They never lasted. The smile was still on her lips when she noticed the mark. A single print in the soft dirt near the bank, deeper than her own, spaced wider apart. Not made by her, or by Lucy. It faced the cabin, not away. The heel had a notch carved into the center, like the sole of a boot worn down to bone. Her heart clenched. She dropped the bucket. Water splashed over her boots, soaking through wool to skin, but she didn't notice. She turned quickly, scooped Lucy up from the stump, and pressed the child's head into her shoulder. Lucy fussed, but went quiet as soon as she sensed the shift in her sister's grip. Sarah didn't run, not with the baby. She walked steadily, eyes scanning the tree line, listening for the breath of the woods. No bird song, no wind, just the hush of something watching. By the time they reached the cabin, Sarah had barred the door and pulled down the rifle from the mantel. She loaded it with practiced hands, her fingers moving automatically. Her mind, however, raced. The boot print meant someone had been watching, maybe for hours, maybe days. She glanced through the cracks in the shutter. Nothing. But she knew better. She could feel it, that prickling in her spine, the way the air shifted when eyes were near. She waited all night, unmoving, rifle pointed at the door, while Lucy slept wrapped in every blanket they owned. Dawn brought no relief, only another realization: this was no accident. Whoever had been here had left no trail except that one print, placed where it would be seen. It wasn't carelessness, it was a message. She found the second sign 2 days later. While checking her traps in the north woods, she came upon a tree stripped clean of bark. Not from weather, not from geese. Carved into its trunk was a simple shape, a half circle with a slash through it. She recognized it, Jonah Crow's mark. Her father had drawn it in the dirt once, explaining its meaning. Claim, he'd said, the way a wolf pisses on a tree. It meant ownership, territory, threat. Sarah stood before the mark for a long while, clutching her knife. The forest around her breathed slow and deep. She felt swallowed by it, like she was sinking into the dirt itself. She didn't cry. She never cried anymore. Instead, she scraped the mark off with her blade, over and over, until there was nothing left but raw wood and her own heavy breathing. That night, she dug up the small tin buried beneath the floorboards. Inside, 5 cartridges, 2 flints, and a folded page from the Bible. Ruth 1:16 underlined in her mother's careful hand. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Sarah read it once, then slipped it into her pocket. If Crow was coming back, he wouldn't find the same frightened child hiding in the walls. He'd find something else, something forged in fire. Lucy clung to her more often now, as if sensing the storm in her sister's chest. The child's smile had become more cautious, her giggles less frequent. She was learning too. The world was not a place of soft beds and warm milk. It was a blade, and it asked for blood. It was on the 4th night after the mark appeared that Sarah heard the horse. One rider, slow and limping. She extinguished the lantern, grabbed the rifle, and positioned herself beside the window. Through the crack, she could make out a dark figure swaying in the saddle. No torch, no sound but the uneven clop of hooves. She narrowed her eyes. As the rider drew closer, the horse stumbled and collapsed just yards from the cabin. The figure tumbled to the ground with a heavy thud. Silence returned. Sarah waited. Minutes passed. Nothing moved. Finally, she stepped outside, rifle raised, breath tight in her chest. The man lay face down in the dirt, unmoving. His coat was torn, blood soaking the back in a sticky black pool. He looked half dead. Not Crow, not any of the men from that awful night. His skin was weather-darkened, his hair black and matted with sweat. One leg bent at an unnatural angle beneath him. A knife stuck from his shoulder, broken off at the hilt. She didn't want to help him. Everything in her screamed to leave him there. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the way he'd come alone. Maybe it was the blood. Maybe it was the look in Lucy's eyes as she peered from the doorway, clutching her blanket like a shield. She dragged the man inside. For 3 days he teetered on the edge of death. Fever took him hard, burning through him like a wildfire. She cleaned his wounds with boiled moss, packed them with crushed yarrow, did what her mother had once done for her father after a winter hunt had gone wrong. She spoke nothing. He groaned in a language she didn't know, or maybe in none at all. Lucy watched him from a distance, curious but silent. On the 4th morning his eyes opened, dark, sharp, watchful. He tried to sit, winced, then looked at Sarah. You fix me? She didn't answer. He tried again. Why? Still she said nothing. She handed him a tin of water and walked away. The days passed. He recovered slowly, speaking little, eating what she gave, helping with what tasks he could from the porch, gutting fish, mending broken traps, sharpening blades. He had a quiet efficiency, the sort of patience that came from long days in silence. He never asked questions. She didn't offer answers. Lucy liked him. She'd hand him sticks, rocks, anything she found interesting. Once he carved her a small wooden horse. The child carried it everywhere after that. Sarah remained cautious. Every glance, every movement, she studied. He didn't flinch when the wind carried distant sounds. He walked without snapping twigs. He sat with his back to the wall, never the door. This was not a man unfamiliar with danger. He bore it like a second skin. One evening, as the fire crackled low and Lucy slept curled by the hearth, he finally spoke again. "They're coming for you." She looked up sharply. "I seen the signs," he continued. "In the hills, same ones I saw before, south of the Platte, always before fire." "Who are you?" she asked. He didn't answer. Silence stretched. "They killed my family," she said quietly. "Burned our home. Took everything but her." He nodded slowly. "Then they'll come back. They don't leave things undone." She stared into the flames, her fingers tightening around the rifle. "You gonna help?" The man shrugged. "If I leave, they kill you. If I stay, maybe not." "You got a name?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Call me Hawk." It didn't sound like his real name, but it would do. In the days that followed, Hawk began training her, not with words, but with actions. He showed her how to move through the woods without sound, how to smell smoke before it showed, how to sharpen the edge of a blade until it sang. They practiced shooting. Sarah's hands were steady, her aim clean. He corrected her stance once, then never again. She learned from his silence, his gestures, the nod of his chin, the narrowing of his eyes. He was not kind, not in the way stories painted heroes, but he was constant, like stone, and that was enough. She needed no savior. She only needed someone who understood. Together they built traps, not the kind for rabbits, the kind that bit back. The first warning came with the wind. A dead rabbit left on the doorstep, skinned, eyes gouged out. A message. Sarah didn't blink. Hawk took the body, tossed it into the fire, and watched the flames without speaking. That night, Lucy didn't cry, as if she knew quiet meant survival. Sarah sharpened her knife until her hands ached. She thought of her father's last breath, of the way the cabin had burned, of the scream that echoed in her dreams still. She thought of Jonah Crow's smile, the way his hand rested on his belt like it was a promise. They were coming, that much was certain. But this time, she would not be the one to run. Hawk showed her how to see through the forest. He pointed out the trails men made without realizing, the broken reeds, the subtle bends in grass, the rhythm of noise. She tracked with him through mud and pine, her eyes keen, her muscles leaner than they'd ever been. Every night, she read that verse from the Bible. Every night it meant something different. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. She hadn't asked Hawk to stay, but he did. Lucy began saying his name in bits. Hawk. Hack. She laughed every time. Even Sarah laughed once, when the man tried to cook and nearly burned the beans. It was the first sound of joy that had left her throat in months. But the world didn't pause for happiness, not here, not now. The storm was moving closer, and Sarah could feel it in her bones. The night held its breath. A heavy stillness blanketed the land, as if even the trees dared not stir. Moonlight spilled like silver blood across the clearing, casting the cabin in a pale, cold glow. Inside, Sarah crouched by the hearth, rifle across her knees, knife tucked into her boot. Her fingers moved quickly, silently, as she tightened the last snare wire and checked the flintlock's primer. She didn't tremble anymore, not from fear, not from doubt. What coursed through her veins now was fire. Not the wild, reckless kind that had consumed her home, but something slower, smoldering, shaped by loss, and honed by rage. Hawk sat in the shadows near the window, his outline barely distinguishable from the dark. His bow was already strung, quiver at his side, the long knife strapped to his thigh. He had spoken only once that day. "They're here. Not comin'. Here." And she believed him. She had known the signs, missing traps, birds gone silent, the scent of horse sweat on windless air. This was no longer preparation. This was survival. Tonight would decide everything. Whether Lucy would see another sunrise, whether they would reclaim their right to live without fear, or whether the past would finally devour what was left of them. Lucy slept beneath the floorboards, wrapped in pelts and quilts. A small hollow space, padded and sealed against the cold. Sarah had kissed her head before laying the boards down, whispered promises she might not keep. The child's breath had been steady, unaware, innocent. Sarah envied that. The first sound came just after midnight, the dull crunch of boots over frostbitten grass. Not loud, careful, deliberate. Sarah rose, rifle raised, and moved to the edge of the window. Her breath slowed, narrowed, became a rhythm she could hide inside. Outside, shadows moved between trees. 4, maybe 5. No voices, no lanterns, just the scuff of steel and the creak of leather. She glanced at Hawk. He didn't move, but his eyes found hers, and in that glance there was no question of readiness. They had both come too far to break now. The first man stepped into the moonlight, broad, with a beard that caught the silver glow, rifle slung low on his hip. He paused near the stump where Lucy had once played, then signaled behind him with 2 fingers. Another emerged, then another. They circled the cabin like wolves testing the edges of firelight. Sarah's heart pounded, not with fear, but with focus. These were the men who had destroyed everything, who had carved blood into her memory, who had made her a ghost in her own life. Jonah Crow was among them. She hadn't seen his face yet, but she felt him. His presence crawled under her skin like a slow poison. The back window shattered. A rock flew through, scattering shards across the floor. Then silence. A test. Hawk moved first, silent as snowfall, slipping through the side door and disappearing into the dark. It was understood. He would handle the perimeter. She would hold the line inside. Another moment passed. Then the front door creaked. A man stepped into the threshold. He was young, maybe no older than 20, with eyes too old for his face. He didn't hesitate, just raised his pistol and advanced. Sarah waited until he was 2 steps inside. Then she fired. The shot cracked like thunder. The man fell without a sound, body jerking as it slammed into the table behind him. Blood sprayed across the wall, dark and sudden. Outside, shouting erupted. Then gunfire. Chaos tore through the night. Sarah reloaded quickly, ducking low as a second shot blew a hole through the cabin wall. She crawled to the other window, peered through a broken shutter. Hawk was already moving, his form ghosting between trees. He dropped a man with an arrow to the throat. Another turned, fired wildly, then went down screaming as Hawk's knife met his gut. Sarah turned as the back door burst open. Jonah Crow stood there, older, leaner, but unmistakable. The same cruel smirk, the same eyes that once looked at her like a possession waiting to be claimed. He held a rifle loosely in one hand, but his posture was casual, confident. "Evenin', Sarah," he said. She aimed her gun. He stepped inside. "I was hoping we might talk," he continued, voice slick and slow like oil over water. "You've grown. Look at you. Damn near a woman now." "Don't take another step," she said. He smiled wider. "Last time we met, you ran, hid under your daddy's floor. You remember that?" She didn't answer. "He begged, you know, right before we shot him. Said he'd do anything if we let you girls go." Still, she didn't speak. "I'm here for what's mine," he said. "And I reckon that baby, and this land, they're mine now. You'll die before you touch her." He chuckled. "Maybe, but you'll die first." He raised the rifle. She fired. Her shot went wide, clipping his shoulder. He stumbled, swore, ducked behind the table. She rolled across the floor, took cover near the fireplace. Bullets split the air around her. Wood shattered. The cabin groaned. She was out of shots. She scrambled for the extra rounds near the hearth, fumbling as another bullet tore through the wall above her head. Her fingers closed around a cartridge. She rammed it in, cocked the hammer, and rose. Crow was already advancing, bleeding, but grinning like a devil. She aimed. Then Hawk crashed through the side window in a storm of glass and fury. He tackled Crow from behind, knife flashing. The 2 men fell hard, grappling across the floor. Crow roared, slammed an elbow into Hawk's face. Blood spattered. Hawk snarled, struck again. The knife sank deep. Crow screamed. Then a shot. Hawk recoiled. Crow pushed him off, staggered to his knees, raising the pistol again. Sarah stood over him. This time she didn't miss. Crow's body hit the floor with a final rattling exhale. Silence followed. Only the sound of Hawk's breathing, ragged, pained. She knelt beside him, pressed a cloth to the wound on his side. "You're not dying," she muttered. "Not yet." He gave her a weak smile. "You're bossy." "Damn right." Outside, the last of the gunfire had faded. The others had either fled or bled into the ground. She didn't care to check. There was no celebration, only blood, smoke, and the weight of survival settling across her shoulders like a familiar cloak. She opened the floorboards. Lucy blinked up at her, wide-eyed but quiet. Sarah lifted her gently, held her tight. The child clung to her shirt, breathing fast but safe. Still safe. Dawn rose slowly. The clearing was a battlefield, scars etched into dirt and bark, smoke curled from the shattered windows, the air stank of iron and ash. Sarah stood outside, Hawk beside her, arm in a sling, body stitched with fresh wounds. He watched the woods while she dug shallow graves. They buried the men without ceremony. Crow's grave was the deepest. Afterward, Hawk too, turned toward the trees, toward the rising sun. "You'll go?" she asked. He nodded. "Not my place to stay." Sarah didn't argue. She knew. He had stayed longer than he'd intended, fought harder than he had to. That was enough. He paused. "She's got your fight," he said, glancing at Lucy. Sarah smiled faintly. "No, she's got her own." He gave a final nod, then disappeared into the woods like smoke. Sarah stood there a long time, Lucy on her hip, the wind tugging at her coat. She stared out at the horizon, where gold touched the tips of pine trees, and thought about the cost of silence, the price of staying hidden. No more. Inside, the cabin needed mending, the fence would need rebuilding, the earth would have to be seeded again. But not today. Today, they were still standing. Sarah carried Lucy inside, laid her down for a nap, then sat on the porch, cleaning her rifle in the morning sun. There would be more storms, more men like Crow. The world didn't run out of monsters, but now, she had a voice, and a fire that would not go out. The land would remember, so would she, and when the time came again, she would be ready.